U.S.-Mexico border has always been dangerous, but what unfolded along the Rio Grande near Fronton, Texas, stunned even veteran agents. Cartel snipers opened fire from across the river, targeting Border Patrol as they worked the line.
Breaking news from McAllen, Texas, where there was a deadly shooting outside a Border Patrol building.
The first bursts hit metal and dirt, but before the echoes faded, the agents struck back. In seconds, that quiet bend in the Rio Grande became a battleground, and the response that followed left no doubt who controlled the line. The Fronton Island shootout.
Tonight, suspected cartel members are caught on camera opening fire on Border Patrol agents in broad daylight along the Texas border.
By early afternoon on Monday, January 27th, 2025, agents were out in Starr County, Texas. They were just doing their usual watch along the river, nothing out of the ordinary yet. Out in the middle of the channel lay Fronton Island, a low strip of brush and sand that had drawn trouble for years. Most days it blended into the river. On this day, it did not. At about 1:29 in the afternoon, gunfire cracked across the water. Agents radioed the incident, dropped behind their vehicles, and returned fire. Backup began to roll from up and down the line. Fronton Island mattered because of distance and cover. The channels there were narrow. The banks on both sides sat low, and the brush created hiding places. From that kind of ground, someone on the Mexico side could fire at a shallow angle over the water. The short gap left almost no time to react. Agents got behind engine blocks, steel bumpers, door pillars, and the slope of the embankment, and they held the line until help arrived. The place carried baggage. Texas and Mexico had argued over who owned Fronton Island. In recent months, state crews had cleared large stretches of brush and laid razor wire around the island under an effort called Operation Flat Top. Officials said cartel groups used the cover to stage crossings and watch officers. Investigators of this incident later suggested the cartel shooters may have opened fire to cover a failed smuggling attempt or to distract agents during a crossing further downriver. Tactics the cartels had used before along this same stretch. The state public safety department launched a drone to put a camera over the fight. That drone video became the clearest record of the day. From above, it showed armed men pulling back and running toward the island, slipping through brush and shallow water channels. The clip was released that afternoon by a state spokesman and tied the entire timeline together. Thankfully, no one was hurt in the gunfire. The day's events also fit the ground's history. In 1929, a Border Patrol Marine unit near Fronton took more than 50 rounds from the Mexico bank while on patrol. The boat was hit. Nobody on board was hurt. But that daylight fight in Fronton wasn't the end of the violence. Night would bring another round. Late-night ambush along the Rio Grande. On the night of the shooting in Starr County, another exchange of gunfire broke out further west along the border. By nightfall, the air along the Rio Grande had gone still. From time to time, a dog barked somewhere far off, or a patrol truck rumbled softly along the levee road. Then came a sound that cut through the quiet, short, hard pops from across the water. It was gunfire. Agents called it in right away. They dropped low behind their trucks and returned fire. No one on either side was injured. The shots were reported at 10:04 that night. The spot was about 7.5 miles east of the Isleta port of entry, just south of San Elizario, Texas. The agents on duty worked out of the Clint station. The ground along this stretch of river was flat and open, not steep or rocky. At night, you could see porch lights glowing in the distance and the pale outline of the river road. The sound of gunfire carried quickly over the water. The agents who worked here knew the terrain well. They'd driven it hundreds of times, memorizing every bend and low spot. When the first shots cracked across the river, they moved fast and by habit. Truck doors opened and angled for cover. They got behind steel and dirt, checked for muzzle flashes on the far side, and gave short radio updates about where the fire was coming from and how many rounds they heard. As always, the call for backup did more than bring help. It triggered the automatic reviews that came anytime an agent used force or was fired upon. Border Patrol's internal watchdog, the Office of Professional Responsibility, was alerted, and the FBI was brought in too. Their involvement meant the scene would be secured quickly and handled by standard procedure once the gunfire stopped. On the far side of the river, the Mexican military arrived soon after. Once soldiers moved in on the Mexico side and agents held firm on the U.S. side, anyone planning to keep shooting had only one real option: to back off. No one was down, no medevac was needed, and no crossings had succeeded during the confusion. With the danger over, the agents began the careful part of the work. They walked the riverbank with lights, marking where rounds had struck dirt or metal. They collected any shell casings on the U.S. side and logged each one. This wasn't the first time the area had seen gunfire. In April of 2024, someone on the Mexico side had fired at a Border Patrol agent near San Elizario in broad daylight. No one was hit in that case either. The older incident helped explain why the agents on January 27th handled the new one so calmly. Both the afternoon firefight near Fronton and the night exchange near San Elizario showed how unpredictable the border could be in a single day. The same border that echoed with gunfire on the ground has also seen bullets reach the sky. Cartel shoots down a U.S. Border Patrol helicopter. It was a hot Friday evening along the Rio Grande near Laredo, Texas. Around 5 o'clock on June 5, 2015, a U.S. Customs and Border Protection helicopter moved slowly over the river on its usual patrol. The job was to scan the riverbanks, report anything suspicious, help guide ground agents, and then return to refuel. Nothing about the flight seemed unusual until the calm broke. Gunfire came from the ground without warning. The helicopter jolted as bullets struck. Instantly, the pilot pulled the aircraft out of the line of fire, leveled off, and made an emergency landing on the U.S. side of the river. From a distance, it looked smooth, but up close, the metal told the truth. Holes through the side panels and a deep mark where a round hit one of the main rotor blades. No one aboard was injured and no one on the ground was hurt, but the damage showed how close it had come. Investigators arrived before sunset. They walked slowly around the helicopter, studying every mark and hole in the fuselage. Each dent and tear was logged and matched against what the crew had reported. People in Laredo are used to hearing gunfire echo across the river, but bullets actually striking an American aircraft was something different. It was rare, and that rarity was why it caught everyone's attention. Almost immediately, the question shifted from what happened to where it came from. The angle of the bullet holes and the flight path pointed to the south, toward the Mexican side of the river. Laredo police shared that conclusion carefully, stressing it was early information and could change as more evidence came in. Meanwhile, the FBI and the Texas Rangers began collecting witness statements and working through the physical evidence with local law enforcement. That stretch of river gave anyone looking to hide plenty of cover. The banks were rough and uneven, lined with thick brush and dirt roads that twisted in and out of view. Smugglers used those paths often, which was why helicopters patrolled there in the first place. Air units and ground agents usually worked together, watching bends in the river, tracking trucks or small boats and calling out coordinates as they moved in. A few days later, a surprising detail surfaced. A member of Congress from the region said one of the bullets had actually struck the pilot's protective vest after punching through the helicopter's skin. The vest stopped it, and the pilot walked away unharmed. That revelation changed the entire tone of the response. 2 larger Black Hawk helicopters were quickly reassigned to the area, heavier and better armored than the smaller patrol models. The Blackhawks could carry more personnel and were built to handle gunfire if it came again. Mexico also responded. Officials in Mexico City said they were cooperating with the United States on the investigation. That cooperation was crucial because the shooters or any physical evidence could easily be on the other side of the river. At the same time, Mexican leaders pushed back against claims that painted the entire border as a war zone, saying the focus should stay on the specific attack. Investigators on both sides followed standard aviation shooting procedures. Teams retraced the helicopter's route and identified possible firing points along the south bank. They measured distances, photographed the angles, and searched the brush for shell casings, footprints, or fresh tire tracks. They looked for crushed grass or broken branches that might mark a quick escape. The sheriff's office compared notes with federal agents and Laredo police. If the evidence crossed into Mexican territory, they were ready to hand it off to investigators across the river. The search widened as days went on. U.S. and Mexican officers checked well-known crossing spots used by smugglers and compared any ballistic evidence with weapons already seized in other cases. But soon the trail went cold. Weeks passed, then months, and eventually years without any public update. No suspects were named, no arrests announced, and no charges ever filed. The case appeared once in a congressional record the following year, but even there it remained unresolved. The investigation simply faded from view. That helicopter ambush proved how far the cartels were willing to go. What came next showed how far the U.S. was willing to push back. The desert shootout that ended a cartel empire. It started as a routine sweep along the border, the kind that usually came and went without anyone noticing. High over the desert, an American F-16 Fighting Falcon moved on course as evening settled in. Nothing suggested trouble until lights blinked inside the cockpit. Down below, sharp flashes jumped from the rocks. They were gunshots. A coordinated burst came from hidden spots. Rifles cracked and a heavier weapon rattled without a pause. The pilot reacted at once, rolled off the line, climbed out of danger, and leveled where the fire could not reach him. He marked the grid, tagged vehicles, and passed every detail up the chain. People living near the line heard the echoes of automatic fire first, then the low thunder of a jet flying lower than usual. The gunmen believed they had sent a message and could disappear before anyone answered. They jumped into trucks and pushed for the open desert. But the pilot's call was already moving through command. Choices that normally took days were made in minutes. Additional fighters launched. Drones were redirected. Satellites tightened their focus. Blackhawks lifted with teams trained to plant on rough ground. Highway units and off-road teams set up at choke points. In less than an hour, the open land that once felt easy to slip through was no longer open at all. A wide but tight perimeter took shape. From the air, every truck that fled the rocks left a path you could follow. One pickup dropped into a dry wash, slowed for a moment, and gave away a route it had used before. An SUV raced a fence line, betting that speed alone would make it vanish. From above, none of it vanished. Helicopters set teams on ridges, cruisers waited where dirt tracks narrowed. Low passes nudged drivers toward roads they did not want. Inside the cartel's own channels, confidence turned into alarm. Orders came fast. Clear the houses, move the cash, burn what cannot move, scatter across the line. But the clock was no longer theirs. Watchers in the sky were already on their routes. A truck that trusted the dark rolled into a wall of headlights and badges. Another tried the open desert and never saw the quiet sensors tracking its heat and movement. Panic bred mistakes. Every mistake left a mark, and every mark tightened the net. By midnight, the operation had narrowed to 3 main targets. The first sat on a ranch roughly 12 miles north of the border. It had a long drive, the look of a family place, and a reputation for keeping to itself. But the aerial shots told a different story. Warm engines, occupied rooms, and suspicious movement. Before dawn, teams cut the fence and closed in. They had studied the rooms and doors already and knew where to go. Within moments, suspects were cuffed, surprised by how little time they had to react. Inside, the rooms made clear this was not a safe house. It was a headquarters. Maps covered walls, tracing smuggling paths through 4 states. Drawers and safes held ledgers that went past product lists. They named payoffs and people who had looked away. Crates held weapons in depth, rifles, launchers, spare barrels, and belts of ammunition meant for long fights. 15 miles away, a warehouse that posed as a small trucking hub came next. When the door rolled up, the air turned sharp with chemical fumes. Pallets ran in long rows, wrapped bricks of powder and stacks of pills packaged for quick moves into cities and towns. The pipeline that had been feeding overdoses and street violence sat there, boxed and ready to move. Behind a false wall was the part people seldom saw. Men and women held out of sight, treated like freight. They were released. The third target looked nothing like the others. It sat in Phoenix on a quiet street with neat lawns and sprinklers ticking in the dark. Joggers passed in the early hours. Behind one door lived Francisco El Halcon Ramirez, a major figure in the network. He had built a calm public face as a polite neighbor. His kids went to local schools and he waved at people on the sidewalk. He kept his business on the phone and away from crowds. Agents knocked on his door, and when he opened, they cuffed him in his kitchen with a half-empty mug cooling on the counter. By sunrise, 43 people were in custody across the region. 7 of them were priority targets long on federal lists. Trucks, cash, weapons, hard drives, and paper files were seized. In Mexico City, the attack on an American jet forced a decision. There was no more room to stay neutral. Special units moved fast, shutting down crossings that smugglers had used for years. Helicopters began sweeping the dry riverbeds, while intelligence teams opened up files they'd kept quiet until now. Investigators started tracing cartel money through accounts that led straight to real names and real addresses. For once, both sides of the border worked in sync. The legal side moved just as quickly. Extraditions went through without delay. Prosecutors built their cases piece by piece. Phone records lined up with bank transfers, and ledgers exposed fake companies hiding dirty money. Mid-level players flipped, giving up names, codes, and payment dates that backed up the paperwork. When judges looked at the evidence, they didn't see random fragments. They saw a full, connected story with no space for doubt. What made it all stick was how clean the process stayed. Every video clip, message, and seized file came with a clear record of who handled it from start to finish. Nothing was lost or altered. That left defense lawyers with nothing to tear apart. On the ground, the difference showed in daily life before it showed in statistics. Streets that used to empty out at dusk stayed busy. The collectors who came around on Fridays stopped showing up. Restaurants stayed open later. Parks filled again. Parents could relax and shop owners saw customers coming back. Bit by bit, border towns began to feel normal again. Security also started to look different. New towers with radar spotted movement long before it reached the fence. Sensors buried underground caught tunnels early. Quiet drones stayed up for hours, learning patterns and breaking them. The focus shifted from chasing problems to preventing them. The cartels tried to adapt, testing new sea routes and smaller ports, but every flashy move brought the same result: attention, pressure, and another collapse. And then came the day the Jalisco New Generation Cartel took down a military helicopter with rockets. Cartel rockets blast a Mexican army chopper. It was just after sunrise on Friday, May 1st, 2015, when 4 Mexican military helicopters flew low over the hills west of Villa Purificación in Jalisco. This wasn't a normal patrol. For several days, intelligence teams had tracked convoys moving along dusty back roads near Casimiro Castillo. Their headlights came on and off at odd times, and the routes looked suspicious. Commanders believed they were closing in on Nemesio Oseguera Cervantes, better known as El Mencho, the powerful head of the Jalisco New Generation Cartel, or CJNG. One of the helicopters, an EC-725 Cougar, carried 18 people, 5 crew members, 11 soldiers, and 2 federal police officers. Some of the soldiers wore parachutes because the plan was to drop them ahead of the convoy, block the road, and capture their target. But before they could move, the convoy below opened fire. A rocket-propelled grenade slammed into the Cougar's tail, ripping through the metal. Seconds later, another round struck, spinning the aircraft out of control. The helicopter crashed and exploded in flames. The other 3 helicopters, a Bell 412 and 2 Black Hawks, moved in fast, firing to hold back cartel gunmen. Villagers later said the sound of the firefight shook the hills for nearly 2 hours. Initial reports said 3 soldiers were dead, 12 wounded, and 3 missing. By the time hospitals and investigators finished counting, the number had risen to 9 killed in total, 8 soldiers and 1 federal officer. Survivors were flown to a military hospital in Guadalajara. Pieces of the helicopter were found scattered hundreds of feet away, and smoke from the wreck hung in the air for hours. Investigators quickly identified the weapon, a Russian-made RPG-27. At the site, they also found RPG-7 and RPG-22 launchers, light anti-tank weapons, 10 rockets, 15 rifles, 6 pistols, grenades, radios, tactical gear, and almost 4,000 rounds of ammunition. Some uniforms carried patches marked CJNG, Special Forces High Command, meant to make the attackers look like trained soldiers instead of cartel members. The downing of the helicopter was only the start. Within hours, cartel cells across western Mexico launched a wave of chaos. They hijacked buses and fuel trucks, set them on fire, and blocked highways in Jalisco and neighboring states, Colima, Nayarit, Michoacán, and Guanajuato. By official count, 39 blockades went up that day. Thousands of travelers were stranded, gas stations ran dry, and businesses shut their doors. 11 banks and 5 fuel stations were damaged or destroyed. In Guadalajara, one of Mexico's biggest cities, vehicles burned at major intersections until soldiers could clear them. President Enrique Peña Nieto reacted quickly. He offered condolences to the families of the fallen and praised the troops still fighting. He ordered city, state, and federal forces to work under one joint command. Mexico's National Security Commissioner, Monte Alejandro Rubido, promised that the government would use every resource needed to dismantle the cartel. The U.S. consulate in Guadalajara and the Canadian embassy both issued emergency alerts warning people to stay indoors. Days later, at Campo Marte in Mexico City, the president honored the fallen soldiers and met their families, promising that justice would come. Back near Villa Purificación, troops tightened their control. A simple wooden cross was placed near the wreckage to mark where their comrades had died. Checkpoints appeared on roads leading to Autlan, Villa Purificación, and Unión de Tula. Soldiers stopped vehicles, checking for mud, damage, or signs of a quick getaway. The mood was heavy. Just weeks earlier, 15 state police officers had been ambushed and killed on a mountain road near San Sebastián del Oeste. And a month before that, 5 federal police officers and 2 civilians had died in another CJNG attack near Ocotlan. Operation Jalisco, the mission to strike the cartel, was already underway when the Cougar went down. Reinforcements poured in. Within 10 days, about 10,000 troops and 300 armored vehicles spread across the state, searching ranches, blocking roads, and cutting off the cartel's supply routes. 3 years later, in 2018, police and soldiers arrested 14 suspected cartel members in Jalisco and Quintana Roo. 6 of them were believed to have taken part in the helicopter attack. Among the weapons seized were an M60 machine gun, a Barrett .50 caliber rifle, and trucks modified to mount heavy weapons. Only 3 weeks after the Cougar was shot down, Mexican forces had also fought another huge battle at Rancho del Sol in Michoacan, killing 42 armed suspects. Even so, the downing of the Cougar forced changes. Helicopter missions were redesigned. Crews began flying higher, using heavier escorts and relying on armored transports for deep operations. One survivor became a symbol. Federal police officer Ivan Morales Corrales lived through the crash, though he suffered severe burns. He spent months recovering and was later honored for his courage. But his story took a tragic turn. Years later, on the 10th anniversary of the attack, he was ambushed and killed in Morelos. He had testified in the U.S. case against Ruben Oseguera Gonzalez, known as El Menchito, the son of El Mencho. His death showed that even long after the smoke cleared, the violence still reached those who stood against the cartel. Thanks for watching. Now check out the videos popping up on screen for more unbelievable stories.